I just want to continue on the discussion of the critique of the LGBT agenda, who I've, in a previous discussion, exposed as not a preference anymore, but really an appropriation. So the LGBT agenda is not the preference of an individual, which we as Muslims can very, very comfortably coexist with, because we have, as I have shown you in a previous, we have clear verses that stipulate that people are free. Whoever chooses to see will benefit himself, and those who remain blind will suffer the consequences. I am not here to supervise you. This is the message of the Prophet to those who want to dissent and want to practice their own perversion. That is the position of Islam. We are not here to shun or to kill or to throw off the building any person who wants to promote or not promote, who wants to practice their particular understanding of any of sex and any related behavior. So I think what I want to do in this one, in this part 2, is to look at the Islamic alternative. What is then the alternative conceptualization of gender and sex? Because we have one. We have one. We don't have to go to Imam or Maulana, Mufti. The Qur'an is there, and it speaks eloquently. It speaks enough. It summarizes exactly what we need. But before I go there, let me first preface it by saying that Islam is grounded in the divine. We are not grounded in the minds of men. We are not. Islam is not the creation of the human mind or the human whim and fancy. See, that is not the way Islam. If I can compare it, in America there's two conceptualizations of society. The one is America as a republic, as opposed to America as a democracy. Now, what is a republic? A republic is a constitutional democracy. A republic is based on a constitution, a Bill of Rights, on eternal, or at least long-term principles, around which people then structure their day-to-day laws. Now, Islam similarly, not exactly the same, but it identifies or admits to certain core ground rules, as they have in America, the Bill of Rights, article, these Bill of Rights articles. We have the verses of the Quran, the ayat, the hudud, the parameters. And in Islam, we have a set of parameters which we embrace as divinely instituted parameters. And we see those parameters as sacred. And that is the big difference between us and, let's say, the French Republic, France or Britain, where the population at present can basically overturn and change and shift any position at any time. But Islam, as with other enlightened societies, advances rationalism. Yes, Islam is a rationalist society, even though Muslims often don't represent that ethos. But Islam is indeed a rational society. I mean, I can prove it to you. Let me show you a few verses from the Quran, and then you tell me if you don't think these are rationalist verses. Let me find one. Look at that. I'm not going to read the entire verse, but in the creation of heavens and earth, in the succession of day and night, in the sailing of ships on the ocean from which humanity benefits, in the rain which God sends from the sky, with which he revives the earth after being dead, then scatters upon it all types of game, in the turning winds and the clouds which they drive between heaven and earth, in all of this there lies evidence for those who apply their intellect. Now, if you tell me that is not a rational religion that applies empirical readings and experiences and observation to derive evidence of what truth is, then I don't know what is. There's more. In the obscurus, there is a similarity with the screaming of a goat herd to that which only reacts to being shouted and cried at, devoid of listening, devoid of articulation, and devoid of seeing. They cannot apply their intellect. So in this verse, the Qur'an is actually accusing the obscure as opposing rationalism. And I've got a number more. Let me just quickly run through them. Intellect again there, ending with possessors of deep intellect. The last word, except by possessors of intellect, are guiding clues to the intellectuals. The Qur'an is replete with verses that call on people to use their minds, to be intellectual, to think, to be rational. Nobody can tell me that the Qur'an is anti-rational. And so we here are advancing, we are defending rationalism. I'm a defender of reality, of rationalism. But not only that is a fundamental ground position in Islam or the Qur'an, but also that of social pluralism. You see, many Muslims, if you ask them, they tell you, no, but a gay person must be killed. They come up with fabricated understandings which they got from the hadith or from sultans, because in the past Muslims were also oppressive governments and they disallowed the pluralist outlook. But Islam is indeed a pluralist design. Yes, I can prove it also. I can prove that also to you. Take a look at this verse. Okay, let's just quickly look at this verse here. It says, truth comes from your Lord, al-haqqu min rabbikum, faman sha'a falyu'min, wa man sha'a falyakfur, inna a'tadna lidhalimina naran ahatat bihim. Right? Truth comes from your Lord. Let them who choose embrace and let them who choose reject. So what is very, very clear from this is that Islam is rational. And it is pluralistic. There is clearly a pluralistic outlook. And then the second thing is that Islam is rational. As I've shown you the previous pictures, that intellect is mentioned countless times. So, what are some of the core ethics that Islam advances? You see, some of the core ethics that Islam advances, number one, is that sex should be located within a mutual consent regime. What does that mean? That there should be mutual consent for sex, that it shall be between opposite genders, and that it shall be seen to have been given that consent. And that is just under the heading nikah in the Quran. If you look at the word nikah, and we cannot compare nikah to marriage really. Marriage in Christianity is something quite different. You see, in Christianity, marriage is a lifelong vow. In Islam, nikah is a mutual agreement. It's a mutual agreement which brings into being a set of guarantees for both partners. And so when a man and a woman decide to make nikah, in other words, to agree to form a union, a sexual union, then certain rights accrue to both parties. Like to the woman, for example, to the female partner, the right to being sustained through pregnancy and through childbirth and through the early years of child rearing. Those rights are there, the right to being sustained. The mahar, which is the bridal dowry or the gift in Islam, is there to prevent the absconding man, which is a massive problem in the US and in other countries now. The absconding father. And so the bridal dowry is the prevention, or in just to curtail or to restrict or to restrain that tendency of men to abscond once they have taken on the responsibility. And so rights, responsibilities, guarantees are implicit in the whole regime around sex in Islam, and as the Qur'an expresses it. Let me just quickly find you a verse that deals with it. Take a look at this verse here. This is the day that everything wholesome is made lawful for you, including food of the people of the book. Their food is lawful for you, and your food is lawful for them. Lawful are enfranchised women, embraces, as well as enfranchised women from the people of the book that preceded you, when you pay their dowries, and within the secure confines of nikah, of marriage, not permissively or in secret affairs. Anyone who undermines the trust will have his efforts rendered fruitless and will be a loser in the afterlife. And so that verse pretty much sets out the understanding of Islam when it comes to sex and marriage, that it belongs in the confines of a formal regime of consent and of mutual guarantees. Then there's another ethic or a parameter which the Qur'an advances, and that is the prohibition of sexual activity between men. Now, yes, that is so. It is there. It's clearly written in the Qur'an. Check this out, and you'll see. As for when two men engage in homosexual promiscuity, sanction both of them. Should they repent, however, then lift the sanction and absolve them both, for God is forgiving and kind. That is the position. The position is, it is not an accepted practice. It is a practice that doesn't form part of the normal, regular forms of sexual satisfaction or fulfillment that is granted. The Quran doesn't grant it. In fact, there's a verse in the Quran that could also be read similarly for lesbian practice, lesbian sex, and that is this verse here. Where it says, should any of your women practice sexual promiscuity? Now, I understand this verse could read just like general promiscuity, doesn't mean, lesbian promiscuity, to which four of you can bear testimony. So in other words, if a woman is guilty of public sexual promiscuity, then should such testimony indeed be received, place them under house arrest for as long as they live, or until God returns them to the right path. So this one here is really, we need to just reflect on it. What does it really mean? It means, it clearly says what I've translated it as there. Any public displays, because this is really something that is public. The penalty falls if the act is public. Such four people So if a woman engages in promiscuity that is public, then it attracts the sanction. And why am I putting this here? I'm sharing with you the Islamic ethics around sexuality and gender. Right? It is between opposite sexes. It is male, female, male on male or female on female are not really kosher or acceptable means of indulging in sex. There are other verses also that in the Qur'an's additional. I'm not going to go through all of that in the interest of time. But there are other verses which clearly spells out that that incest is not condoned, that bestiality is not condoned. In chapter 70, verse 29 to 31, if you want to go and read it up, it prohibits sex with any other than a human partner. And then, of course, a related discussion is the one about abortion. Abortion clearly declared or declared a negative practice in the Quran, chapter 6, verse 140, where the Quran says, chapter 6, 140, it says, those who carelessly abort their babies out of ignorance have strayed and are certainly not on the right path. So those are some of the ethics around sexuality or sex and gender. And as you can see from what I've read to you and some of these verses, is that Islam does regulate sex. It's less strict than the Jewish regulation. For example, Jewish regulation includes the idea of stoning the adulteress to death, which is not in the Quran. Now, yes, if you want to go and look at Hadith Islam, yes, you will find a lot of Jewish practices in Hadith Islam, which is Islam authored by many Jewish people, like Ka'b al-Ahbar, who were very, very central to the creation of Hadith Islam. Some Jewish scholars, in fact, contributed to the Hadith. They wrote the Hadith. They invented the Hadith. Ka'b al-Ahbar, for example. So, and via Abu Huraira, as I've made previous videos of, who cited these Jewish rabbis, he brought countless Israeliyat or Jewish practices, Talmudic practices into Islam. But a simple reading of the Quran will show you that Islam is much more liberal than Christianity or Judaism. In fact, the idea of the stoning of women is completely countered in the Quran, which speaks about corporal punishment, not death, not a death sentence. Nowhere is there a death sentence for LGBT practices. No way. The one exception is the most harsh one is this one. This is a very harsh penalty. Should any of your women practice, to which 4 of you can, basically it is public acts of sex by a female. And that would be regarded as something that attracts the most serious punishment, which is house arrest for as long as they live, or until God returns them to the right path. Or there is an escape route, as you can see from the verse there. Doesn't have to be lifetime. But that is really pretty much the strongest sanction in the Quran. The Quran does not speak about killing, throwing people off buildings, whatever. But it does lay down certain very important parameters. So the point I was at is that Islam sees sex, or the activity of sex as deserving of regulation, whereas the LGBT agenda regards sex as a personal act of leisure and satisfaction, in no need of regulation, aside from mutual consent, which they don't even require that to be seen. So that could be verbalized or not. It could be implied, just in the act. And we know how problematic that is. If the Me Too movement is based on the idea of men abusing that implied permission or implied consent. In Islam, consent cannot be implied. Consent has to be verbalized and, in fact, made public. Right? And secret liaisons are frowned upon. So we should verbalize our intention to cohabit, to engage in sex, to get married. We don't use the word when we do nikah. So we have two areas of dispute with the LGBT agenda. So there's the fundamental dispute around freedom of choice, which they deny us, the freedom of the community not to adopt the agenda. Right? That is one freedom that we are being denied. And their conception of sex and gender. The way they see sex as unrestricted, unrestrained, unregulated. Those are the two areas of difference that we experience with each other. Now, why does Islam advance these parameters? Why can we not decide on these parameters ourselves? Because, as I mentioned earlier, that Islam sees rights, truths, reality as beyond or greater than our capacity to handle these important core aspects of humanity. The concept of truth, capital T, of rights, capital R, reality, capital R. These are profound, transcendent ideas and realities, which the human mind is often not able of fathoming in its entirety. And that is Islam. That is why Islam actually brings in certain parameters, which will present to us almost like masts or like the support posts to our own agency. We have agency, yes, we have agency. But our agency is kind of like framed within certain sound, healthy parameters. And Islam sees the term haqq as something that is divine in origin, divine in nature. It is materially and spatially transcendent. Truth doesn't amount to what we say is truth. Truth doesn't amount to what I feel or think is truth. Truth is something which is independent and objective and besides what I think and feel. And that is the Islamic position, is that I cannot claim to produce or to understand or to fathom or to be in complete control of what is truth. And so also then the idea of rights, because in Islam the same word that is used for truth, haqq, is also used for rights. The plural of the word haqq, huquq, means rights. So truth and rights are basically both meanings that come out of the same word, truth. And the ontology of truth is God. The truth is associated with the divine. And so rights also, capital R, the ontology of rights, the being, the very fact of it being something, of it being there, that is the ontology, right? The fact that there is this thing called rights, is not ontologically grounded in human beings' minds and it is ontologically grounded in the eternity of the divine. And that is how we view it. Rights does not accrue to you because another man gave you your rights. Because if some man is able to give you rights, then that same man or woman is able to retake or to remove that rights from you. But we believe that rights are God-given. Rights are divinely given. Rights are divine in origin. The same with morality. You see, practice, healthy practice, sexual ethics are not ethics that we decide and agree upon. These are ethics that we find, timeless ethics, based in the Qur'an, based in the divine. And that is how we view morality also. There is no morality without a divine ontology to this, to morality. If you decide to make morality something that is subject to a vote, then it loses its timelessness, its ancient nature. You see, it becomes flimsy, it becomes transactional, and it loses its permanency and its transcendence. So, because why can human beings not be the master of their own rights and their own truth? Simply because human beings are not all that matter. Human beings are not all that matter. The living, the current generation of the living is not all that matters. There are other beings that matter. There is the unborn, the children that are to be born from a sexual union. They have rights, and they don't have a vote. They don't have a say. It's life. It's future life. And why should we decide that rights start when you're born? Rights start from before you are born. A child that is awaiting birth already has certain rights, and we know that we tell pregnant women that you can't drink, you can't smoke. What are we doing? We are defending the rights of the fetus, of the unborn child. Now, how the heck can you tell a mother you can't drink or you can't smoke, but you can kill that baby? You can't drink, you can't smoke when you're pregnant, but you know what? We do allow you to slaughter the fetus. So our conception of rights is that they accrue not only to the living, but also to the unborn. But then there's also the rights of the dead. There's the rights of the dead. I mean, the dead have rights. The dead have the rights to, for example, their reputation being defended. We cannot destroy and wreck people's memory and their reputation. People have a name even after they die. They have the right, the dead have the right to being buried at the very least. The dead have the right to not being mutilated at the very least. So what I'm saying to you is, you who think that all rights are man-made and all rights are in the hands of a present generation of people, that's nonsense. The Qur'an's position is that rights, truth, and reality transcend way beyond what the present group of voters and people can decide on. And so it places sex and gender in a similar position. It sees sex and gender as very, very integral to the overall conceptualization of rights and gender. And you cannot come and argue away something that we in our design, in our understanding, regard as timeless, eternal, transcendent. You know, when it comes to seeking a livelihood, you all agree that people should be restricted in the things they can do to earn a livelihood. Like, people will agree that you cannot sell destructive substances to the community in order to themselves survive. You know, we cannot sell poison, we cannot sell dangerous things. We cannot endanger the lives of others in our pursuit of a livelihood. So why should it be any different for sex? See, we defend the position that we have ethics, we have sexual ethics, and our ethics are not grounded in what is the word, in superstition or in myths or in legends. Our ethics are grounded in sound ideas Our ethics are rational. And when it comes to business and to livelihood and people, we believe you agree with us that there are ethics around business. So what we are saying is there are ethics around sexual practice and around gender also. And we need to be given the freedom to recognition of our ethics. And we cannot be imposed upon. Our ethics, our view of sexual ethics cannot be delegitimized. It cannot be negated. It cannot be erased. And that is what we are fighting for. You see, sexual behavior in society has major repercussions, major implications, major ramifications in society. I live in a society where 3/4 of the children born in poorer areas are fatherless. 3/4 of children born in poorer areas are uncared for, have to make do with a measly pittance, almost not enough to just be basically sustained on. And the state has attempted to take over the role of the father, and it's not able to do that, because being a father is more than a $5 a month stipend that these mothers are getting, or $20 a month, 350 rand in South African currency. And where's the other role of the father, to be not just the breadwinner, which is ridiculously placed at $50, 350 rand a month. But where's the other roles of the father? Right? To be a co-caregiver to the mother. So sexual behavior, rampant, illicit, unrestrained, dysregulated sex, has many, many negative, destructive effects in society. We know it. We see it around us. I refer to it as dysregulated sex. It's morally reprehensible because it subverts broader rights, truths, and realities. It strips the child of its rights. It strips society of its rights. It strips the woman of her rights. And the Qur'an has a term for it: unrestricted, unrestrained, dysregulated, perverse sex in the Qur'an, or sexual behavior, is called fawahish. And fawahish in the Qur'an is a word that refers to a entire sort of category of unregulated or dysregulated forms of sexual behavior. And it is regarded as a moral and a social corruption. Its practitioners are doomed to condemnation on earth and in the afterlife. Islam's condemnation of fawahish, dysregulated or perverted sexual acts, it's not without justification. I've given you some examples. The situation with how women suffer because of the dysregulation of sex. But it has further, the fawahish that the Quran speaks about, in other words, sex is beyond the regulated or the parameters. It has a host of other negative consequences. Let me share with you some of them. You see, as I mentioned to you earlier, that we are a rational people. Our critique is not based on superstition, myth, legend, or just our own invention. Our argument that we advance, our alternative or the original conceptualization of sex, is a rational one. And research bears us out. Research bears us out. And I've got some of the research here, and there are a number of these research papers. You see, but it's very difficult to find them now, because obviously I will come to this in a moment. There's an actual active agenda to suppress rational thinking, rational treatment of the LGBT agenda. And some of the research says, like, for example, men who engage in unprotected and anal intercourse outside of exclusive reported a greater fatalistic outlook, were more dissatisfied with life. Quality of life is becoming an emerging issue for older gay men with HIV. gay and bisexual men are diagnosed with prostate but have poorer sexual function and quality of life outcomes. Up to a quarter of transgender people who undergo medical sexual regret their decision. This is a massive, massive trauma on society. A quarter of the people. And right now the latest is that countries in Scandinavia have in fact chosen to readopt a rational approach to this discourse. And now, are they going to be accused of being homophobic? I wonder. STIs, HIV, AIDS, unwanted pregnancy, as I've mentioned earlier, are all adverse outcomes of casual sex. So contemporary research, you see, contemporary research bears us out. If you allow for a rational discussion on the topic, then you cannot win the argument. You see, the LGBT agenda has moved away from a rational discussion of the topic. It no longer wants science and research to dominate the discussion. In fact, it wants to impose on science and on research its perception, its view of reality. Because contemporary research has nothing but negative outcomes. The only type of contemporary research that would be in support of these alternative ways of sex and gender, alternative understandings, would be where the argument is for mental well-being. So where people regard sex as the impulse that needs to be that needs to be satisfied as a contributing behavior to mental well-being. In other words, if people argue that for people to be mentally well, they need to respond to the sexual impulse. So in other words, if I want to have sex, I should just have it with anyone, male or female, whatever. There's no restraint on it. If that is your outlook, if the satisfying of the impulse, and if you associate that impulse satisfaction with mental well-being, crazily as it might sound, then that's the only line of argument that rationally would justify it. It's a very difficult idea that I'm trying to put across here. But I think the point is that the only way people can convince you that the agenda makes sense or is rational is by telling you that you have the right to satisfy your every sexual impulse, which is absolutely ludicrous. Imagine telling people that I give you good advice, spend your money willy-nilly. Do with your money whatever you please. What you will be doing is you will be causing great harm and destruction. We know now that the satisfying of the impulse is one of the major problems that have led to the demise and to the decline of America. You know, the promotion by big business, by corporate America, to the common man on the street, that they should just satisfy the impulse, whether it is the impulse to be angry, to be go into rage, to spend, to indulge, to eat. That satisfaction of the impulse is one of the most destructive phenomena that you can find. It is the sure route to decline of a society, not just a society, but of an individual also. And so we deny that that is a rational way along which you can argue for sexual freedom. You know, freedom does not equate to the satisfying of the impulse. You see, that is the quickest way to lose freedom. And I live in a country where European settlers arrived at these shores around about 1652. And one of the means of conquest, one of the tools of conquest, was in satisfying the impulse of the indigenous, teaching the indigenous that your job is to satisfy your sexual or your every impulse. And through the satisfaction of the impulse, did the indigenous of this land, did they eventually surrender their freedom to the conquerors, who were not really there to satisfy their impulse. They had a long-term vision, a long-term view. So the Qur'an's shunning of dysregulated sex, it comports with rationality. It comports with research. It comports with what is in the interests or in the interest of society and humanity at large. There are certain questions that we weren't even allowed to ask, like the decline of populations in the West. Could it be related to abortion? Could it be related to homosexuality? Could it be related to the breakdown of the family? And declining populations is a key crisis. If you cannot replace the humans that are dying with new living creatures, new living humans, that is the ultimate destruction of society. That is genocide. And so, are we allowed to even explore the long-term demographic destruction brought about by sexual dysregulation? I think the research is not enough, but the research is not really allowed in this area, because to reiterate the point I made earlier, that the LGBT agenda has shut down rational thinking on the topic, and we need to come and defend that rational thinking. So I will stop there with part 2, and I will offer you part 3, during which we will look at the agenda really as an instrument of colonialism, as an instrument of erasing our traditional identities.